Manuela del Forno. And again, I would like to thank you all so much for being here, and especially to Serenella for the invitation. I'm also excited to be talking to you more about lichens. And to get started, I am a research lichenologist at the Botanical Research Institute of Texas, or short for BRIT. And also I'm a research associate at the Smithsonian National Museum of Natural History. So to get started, I want to sort of ask you all, what do you see in this picture? So maybe we can have a few people saying what they see. Let's see, what's the chat saying? So what do you see in this picture? Mushroom and lichens, moss, yes, very good. So we definitely see all of that. And let's move on. So how about now? What do you see now? Okay, well, somebody said lichen, and that's great, because a lot of the people would say that the first thing that they see is a fox, and they barely notice everything else around it. And I want to say that for you to be in my mind setting for today's talk, I actually see the lichen first, and then I see, oops, there's a fox there as well. All right, so I think, and hopefully by the end of this talk, you'll be able to also see lichens everywhere that you go. And you know, it's sometimes we don't notice lichens around us, but I guarantee you that they will be there. They're present in all terrestrial ecosystems on Earth. And these are some photos from Great Falls. If you've been there, I think this is the Virginia side, but I'm not quite sure. I've been to both. But you know, you see lichens on the rocks, on the trees, and your walk to the park, and so forth. But what are lichens really? Lichens are a fungal lifestyle, and you know, along with other decomposers that you might see on the hike, and some yeasts that you might eat on the bread, along as parasitic fungi, and also there are other types of fungi that are associated into symbiosis. And these lichens are included in this group, as well as, for example, microorganisms. And today we're going to focus on the lichens. And lichens are one of the most famous or classic examples of symbiosis. And what does that mean? Well, symbiosis literally means living together. And in a lichen, what's living together is primarily one or a main fungus component, right here represented as for this hyphae. Usually one, but sometimes more photosynthesizing organisms. And in this case, here represented by the word algae, but just keep in mind that photosynthesizing organisms can be green algae, but also cyanobacteria, along with a complex community of microorganisms, abbreviated here as the microbiome. And this is primarily composed of fungi, other fungi, and bacteria. And this will all together form this structure that we see in nature as the lichen thallus. So if you must be thinking, well, if it's a symbiosis, what are they getting from each other? And this is going to be in the next slide, but first, and maybe it will be easier to explain, you can see here in this diagram here, imagine that a lichen has been sliced, and what you see is a layer of this lichen that is being formed by only the fungus, and then you're gonna have an algal layer where is the photobiont, and then more parts of just the fungi. And in this other image, you can see that these more or less round structures here are the unicellular green algae in this case, and then they're wrapped around these threads that you see, and these are all fungal hyphae. So this is a real image of how a lichen actually is. And now, by keeping this structure of the lichens in mind, so the fungi is providing the photobiont with primarily protection. So imagine if you're a free living algae, you're completely exposed to, you know, wind, a lot of water, sunlight. But if you're living inside of the lichen talus, it's a much more stable environment, because remember that this layer of algae represented here in the green, again to show you, it's sort of creating this buffer to the outside. So it's a more stable long-term environment. And in return, the algae is providing food, and by that meaning they're making photosynthesis and sharing then its carbons, its sugars with the fungi. And I mentioned that there's also a complex microbial community attached or associated to the lichens, and there's so many different functions that they perform, and most of these are still unknown. And this is one of my favorite new images of the complexity of the lichen. And you don't have to grasp the whole concept here, but it is to show you how, again, in the diagram, you're going to have layers of the fungi, the photobiont, and then also these other little rounds and blues and reds here. They're going to be representing all this bacteria and several of the functions that they may perform, such as nutrient supply, so provision of vitamin 12 and hormones. So now we know and have a much better understanding that they're not only two main components, but also an associated microbiome to lichens. And therefore, just to summarize, the lichens then are the resulting structure of this symbiosis. So what you see in nature is what we call the lichen talus. And then you must be thinking, well, there's just so many things going on. How do you name a lichen? Because, you know, there's just so much going on. So now I want you to, again, this is an image of several different lichens living here. I want you to think and take a guess. How do you think a lichen is named? So do you think it's like the association has a name? Do you think it's the name of the photosynthesizing system, the fungi, the bacteria, or the community, a unique name? What do you think? Common or scientific? Just an idea. So I was talking about lichens. So how do you think that the lichens get their names? You know, because let's say a plant has the name of the whole plant, but lichens there are, or animals, you know, but there's just so many things. Okay, it has its own unique name, maybe by the way they look. So actually the lichen is named after the fungus. So it's a lichen forming fungi. So even though the lichen structure is a unique result of a symbiosis and completely different from other symbiosis, because think about other examples of symbiosis, the classic, you know, Finding Nemo, the sea anemone and the clownfish. It's, even though it's a symbiosis, you see the two different animals, and you know, bees and flowers. There's so many examples of symbiosis, but you still see two separated mycorrhizae. For example, you see the tree and the mushroom, but lichen is unique in its own way, because what you see in nature is the structure. You don't see just the fungi on its own. All right, so the algae may there are some species of algae that or groups of algae that can be inside of the towels and outside, but not the fungi. So the fungi depends on this symbiosis, and therefore it gets their name. So when I talk about lichen species, I'm talking about the name of the fungi involved, and there are 20,000 known species of lichens. Do we have a question or?
No, it's just responses to your question.
All right, okay. So let's keep going. And I love this slide because it just really reflects how diverse lichens can be. And the name of where the lichen is growing, so you can see there sometimes lichens growing on the soil, on the rocks, or on the trees, and even on leaves. And a lot of the times you're walking around and then you see just this like sidewalk full of these yellow or orange stuff, and you don't even realize that's actually a lichen as well. And you can see right here, and the name of this where the lichen is growing, we call the substrate. So for example, in this case right here, the substrate of this lichen is the leaf, for example. But there's also, you know, so this is a man-made substrate, but there also sometimes can grow on a car, for example. And I always say that whenever I finally buy my own home, I want to buy a car and just like live it there to see what's going to happen and what lichens are going to grow. So maybe now during the pandemic that people are not really going to work, you might have some lichens growing on them. But that would be really cool. You can send me a picture of that. And they may also live in very many like different environments. And you know, you might think, wow, lichens only live in these pristine environments, but not really. We can see lichens pretty much everywhere, and that's one of the most exciting things about them. So yes, you will see them in the beautiful forests of the Philippines, for example, like in this picture, but you can also see them in pretty extreme environments, such as these rocky shores in Santorini. So imagine like, oh, let's go there for honeymoon. It's a wonderful place, but imagine
you can watch it here if you want.
I don't have.
But then imagine that, okay, over there you're staying in a hotel. Imagine if you would have to be under sun for so many hours without any protection. So it's a quite extreme environment. Or also in the desert where you don't think that there is, excuse me, so much diversity. You start looking up these rocks around here and you see so many different lichens, and that's another very difficult environment. But good for us, they're also in urban areas. So you don't have to go too far to see some real life lichens, and you can start tomorrow, because today might be a little bit late, but tomorrow you can go around and start looking at your own lichens. And lichens may also grow in very unusual places, such as this cemetery at the Patuxent Refuge and Research Center. So they have several historical cemeteries, and then some of them are completely covered in this reindeer lichen. And some of these tombs, sometimes they provide very good benchmark for studies, for example, that see how old the lichens are, because then you have a timestamp in these tombs that were put up, and then lichens will start growing, and then you can see how much the lichen has grown in those tombs. So people have used that for measuring how old lichens can be and how much grow, what's their growth rate, for example. And what does that lead us? So lichens are pretty much everywhere, we got it. How are the taxonomical implications, and what are some of the modern concepts? So I've been talking that lichens have a microbiome, but that's something more or less recent, all right? So historically, a lichen has been described as having two components, the fungi and the algae, all right? So imagine if you just have two components, so this dual organism, if you have it in the lab and you separate the two different components and cultivate them, so you have a culture with fungi, a culture with algae, okay? When you put them back together, in theory, they should create a lichen, right? But that has never been accomplished. So this reconstituted talus that you see in this very historical or this very classic image for us lichenologists, it does not look like the original lichen. So this has never been accomplished. And now we know that perhaps one of the reasons is that lichens are a lot more than just these two components. They may also have a lot of bacteria around and other fungi. So the studies now are much more evolved in genomics and transcriptomics. So a lot of these sequencing DNA has allowed us to also investigate what are these other organisms or who they are and what they're doing there. And you may have heard a few years ago that, oh wait, now lichens also have yeasts, and that became a huge huge news in the lichen world because, well, suddenly now people say that we also have to include yeasts in their description of what a lichen is. And this was especially brought up by this amazing science paper by Spribiel and colleagues, that the story started of these two different lichens here that you see on your screen. So Bryoria fremontii is brown and Bryoria tortuosa is yellow. So we can see that they look very different because they have different colors. However, genetically, they were identical. So how is it possible that they have the same genetic and look so different? So that's when researchers started digging around and they found that this one right here, the yellow one, had more volcanic acid, which gives this yellow appearance. But what is it causing this? Well, utilizing a technique called fluorescent in situ hybridization, or FISH for short, which is a technique that utilizes probes that will hybridize in pieces of the DNA. And if they do, they will emit they will have a fluorescent that then when you put it in a microscope will emit light. And then this is the differences that you see in these images right here in B and D. And you can see that the bottom one has a lot of more of these green dots showing that this Bryoria tortuosa has a lot more of these yeasts because these probes were hybridizing with these yeasts that they were investigating. So this is the story behind the yeasts in lichen, because now this something extra may also be interfering in the way that the lichens look. However, research after that started digging around. It's like, how is it possible that we missed out on this for such a long time? Well, more recent research found out that yes, yeasts can be found in lichens, but not all of the lichens. So it's very hard to actually find a definition for what a lichen is, because and you can mostly quote me on that one, anything can happen in lichens. So in this case here, or most of the lichens tested here, they did not find yeasts. And then this more even recent paper found that yeasts were less associated with the lichen, so less intimate, engaged in a less intimate association with the lichen than the fungi and the photobiont. So the yeast was not necessarily occurring in certain patterns, as we do see with the two main components. But the twists and turns keep coming because they also found yet another component beyond the yeasts in some of the lichens. So some lichens now we know have yeasts, and they're very abundant and found across many different groups of lichens, and that's very exciting. And then in this paper that came out last year, you can see here in this lichen here called Letara vulpina, known as the wolf lichen. They also utilize this technique that I mentioned called fish. So they utilize different probes. So each one of these probes was targeting a different part of the lichen, if you can think about that. All right, so if you follow me here in the colors, you see that there's some structures here observed in red, and that is the original or the microbiome, the main fungal partner that we saw at the beginning, known as the Letara vulpina, and the dots, the blue dots inside are their nuclei. And then they had two different fluorescent dyes to color the other fungi present in this lichen. So this Cyphobasidium here, it's the yeast in yellow, and then they found another fungi here in red, forming these very big structures here, the tremella. So it's really amazing to see that lichens may have so many components, and that's why more and more now we're understanding that lichens are not just these two species and have more than that. All right.
We
And
have a question.
all
How
right.
old are lichens and do they predate terrestrial plants?
Very good question. There's a paper about that. So the best or the most well-known numbers for these is, or I should say that the most, I think, secure fossil dating for lichens is about 400 and 450 million years ago. So they're pretty old, and they are, you know, they were some of the oldest things. When I talk to friends that work with like animals, they have a totally different idea of what's old and new. And Serenella, you can probably also illuminate us on fungi, but the split between Asco and Basidiomycota, I think, is around 400 or 500 million years ago, right? So
Yeah, something like that. But
yeah, so lichens are pretty old in that sense. All right, so let's keep going. Great question. And let's talk about then something else that could happen in lichens. And I mentioned at the introduction that some lichens, I said that usually one, but sometimes more photobionts can be present. And this is the case that you can see here in this lichen that is green. And then you're gonna have these dots here in dark. And the picture that you see here is again another cross section. And then you see this green layer here that is formed by the green algae. And then these black dots that you see here, it's actually forming this structure here. Okay, we call it cephalodia, and it's actually being responsible then for fixing nitrogen. All right, so in this case, there's one main fungi and two photobionts, and that's called a tripartite lichen. And something else, and I'm just really excited, it's one of my newest slides. It's if you think about lichens being something so fascinating and so unknown, imagine that there is so many different, actually there's over 2,000 species of fungi. They use lichens as their substrate. So fungi that grow exclusively on lichens, all right? And that's pretty amazing. So, and these can again be across many different groups, but primarily they are Lichenologist ascomycetes, all right? And then here you can see in this, let me explain to you what you're seeing there. So these reddish, brownish little spots here, this is an Artonia. So Artonia is a genus of fungi that can be lichenized, or they can be just growing on a lichen, so not lichenized. And here is the actual lichen structure. So this is the thallus of the lichen, and this is one of their reproductive structures. And we won't have time to talk today about reproduction of lichens much. I just want to mention that they are primarily done by two ways. So sexually via spores, like other fungi, then they would have to go and find a photobiont as a partner, or they have this sort of combo package. It's already coming with a little bit of the algae, a little bit of the fungi, along with the microbiome. All right. And then a few examples down here, I want to point out to this one right here, B. And this is a case of fungi that is an yeast, but they are forming these structures are known as galls. So some of these Lichenologist fungi, sometimes they have symptoms like the ones that you're seeing here, you know, these black dots here that does not belong naturally to the lichen. So this is a fungi living in this lichen, but sometimes they can be completely asymptomatic, and that's why we've never noticed some of these yeasts before, because not all the time they show these galls. So let's move on to how do we study lichens in the molecular context, because there's so many things. So a lichen is a natural environmental sample, and when you extract the DNA of the lichen, you're going to extract the DNA of everything. So then depending on your research question, if you're interested in the fungi, for example, to study diversity and evolution of fungi, then you separate in the lab according to a few different techniques. So if I'm interested in the fungi, I'm just going to select parts of the lichen genome to study the fungi, and the same with the photobiont or the bacteria. But there's also techniques such as metagenomics that you just sequence everything that is in your sample. And that's going to include then all of this microbiome, or if you had like plant pollen that fell around, or if you have other animal parts that might be inside or trapped inside the lichen. So you're also going to sequence that. So it's pretty much all of the stuff in this mini environment that is the lichen. And why are lichens important? I know you're all naturalists and probably already know a lot about lichens and what they're important. So I hope I can give you a few more ideas about that, because they're photosynthesizing systems. They are involved in primary production. As I mentioned previously, they're also involved in nitrogen fixing. And something really cool about them is that they're rock weathering, and that they're colonizers. And how does that work? Well, in some environments, when you only have bare rocks, if let's say one of these combo packages fall into one of these areas and find it a suitable environment, is going to grow, for example, into a lichen. And then the lichen thallus may expel sort of enzymes, and these enzymes will break down the very, very outer layer of these rocks, creating this microenvironment or this sort of dust. Then now more plants can live in the habitat that before was unlivable. So that's why you see here lichens as pioneer species.
We have a quick question.
Yes.
Yeah, we're wondering if any lichen are found in water or sometimes substrates that can be submerged.
Amazing question. Good job. Yes, there are. They're not full marine lichens. For example, you won't go in the depths of the ocean and find lichens there. However, may live in marine environments, sort of in the coast, for example, that there's a tide go up and down. So lichens can live there, as well as fresh water. So it's really cool sometimes when you go to a waterfall, for example, and you can see lichens growing at the bottom. So yes, lichens can be fully submerged. Do we have more questions, or should I?
Nope, that's all for now.
All right, thank you. Well, lichens can be an important food source for several animals. And I included here these adorable snub-nosed monkeys in Asia, because you can see here he has his mouth full of these lichens of the genus Usnea. And it's their primary food source because they live in the canopy of trees, and that's how they gather all of their food. Look at this like ball of lichens right there. But you probably also heard that reindeer lichens eat lichens. Reindeers, excuse me, eat reindeer lichens. And, you know, they have this sort of appearance, or the one also that you saw at the cemetery. And it's one of their main food sources, especially during winter. Imagine that everything else is pretty much dead. Some lichens are still going to be hanging from the trees and on the ground, where the reindeer is going to dig around and put some of the snow aside and eat these lichens. And aside from that, reindeer lichens, as well as other lichens that you can see here in this image from West Virginia, they create this microenvironment that's going to be home for several animals. And sometimes when you're looking around and you see like ants coming by, or spiders love lichens. So it's a very important group of organisms that help us, a lot of other organisms, to hide, for example, and play the predator-prey game, right? So aside from that, several lichens are used as nest building material. And these are some images from hummingbirds in Virginia taken by my colleague at the museum, Gary Graves. And we were studying, and we are actually able to extract the DNA of these hummingbird to get the species lichen of this DNA, or which species, excuse me, were being used by these hummingbirds, because sometimes it's hard to identify a lichen by a tiny fragment. So with DNA, we were able to confirm that it is a species that was found in the neighborhood. And there's over 50 species of birds in North America that may use lichens in their nests, as well as a few species of small mammals.
We have another question real quick. It was about the reindeer
Yes.
lichen. So do white-tailed deer also eat the reindeer lichen?
I don't know about that, actually. Good question. I have no information about that, and I haven't witnessed that myself. So it's a good question. And if somebody finds out about that, do let me know. But I am not aware of that. So.
Thank you. That is all for now.
Mm-hmm. Good. So something else, they're also sort of like background for mimicry. And here we're going to play a game. All right. So here, I guess you can all see this right here, this leaf bug growing on this leaf right by this leaf completely covered by lichen. So how about here? Do we have volunteers to show us where are some like hiding spiders? We see something in the chat. Let me see. Spider on right middle on both trees. Yes. All right. So here's, okay, I guess I started with an easy one. So we see this spider right here and right here. All right. How about now? Do you see where is the spider? Take a sip of water. Everybody's really sharp right there in the middle. Good job. Now this one, it might look very easy for you too, but imagine we were a group walking by and just hiking around, and I said, wait everybody, just a second, there is a moth in this tree, and this is actually on an endemic palm species from Jamaica. So do you all see the moth? Yeah, so let me bring it up close, right? Right there, okay? So what is fascinating to me here is that you can see this sort of lines here in the moth, and that's mimicking, it's the pattern of each one of these lines that you see here is one lichen separating from another individual. So this is the pattern that this lichen mosaic is formed, that is this moth is mimicking. And now I have a really hard one. Do you see an animal there? Okay, give you one more minute. No, it's not a butterfly or a moth. Lower left, yes, exactly. Great job. Look at that. It's one of my most, let me show you again, right there, okay? And some people sometimes say this orange stuff, that's the sexual reproduction structure known as an apothecia. So in this region right here, that's where you're gonna have the spores of the lichens. Okay, so so far I've been talking about how lichens are important for the ecosystem, but how about for us humans? I would say that especially here in the New World, we don't have a close connection. Yes, what was the creature? Yes, it is a type of grasshopper. Okay. All right, somebody also talk about the quick information on deer eating. So no specific information was found. Yeah, I haven't heard about that either. All right, so lichens have been used as natural dyes. So for example, here you can see the species of the lichen and the color of these dyes. And you'll see why in a little bit, is because of their chemical components. They've also been used as a food source. Okay, so right here you can see with some pine nuts, litmus paper. Who remember those litmus papers? They were done with lichens. And for sounds good. Sorry, I was just keeping the chat right there. I was also curious to see if somebody else found that. And some of these natural groceries, they will also have other cosmetic products, sometimes deodorants or colognes with lichens in it. And here I have this image because lichens have been also historically used in perfumes, especially for like fixing the smell. And one of my favorite products are the ones at the bottom here, is this sort of cough drop made with Cetraria islandica. So it's called the Icelandic moss, even though it's a lichen, and they're very tasty. I actually have some right there. And if you've been to Iceland, or if you're going to Iceland, maybe after the pandemic, write this down. There's a schnapps that is made with lichen, and it's right here. So you can sort of see there's like pieces of lichens in there. And if you're wondering how does that taste like, imagine in your mind what a lichen tastes like, and it's exactly like that. So I don't know. Some people say I don't know what a lichen would taste like, but I don't know. I feel like it's spot on what your imagination would guess. So it's a very traditional there, and a lot of people liked. I think for me it was just like sort of too close to home. But then there's also this very fancy plate here is a dinner that I went to in Finland, and this very part here is a piece of reindeer lichen, and that was actually pretty tasty, but it was deep fried, and some people say that anything deep fried is gonna taste good. So you're gonna have to test that for yourself.
So we
And
have another quick question about
mhm.
harvesting lichen.
Ooh,
If
perfect timing. Look at that.
yeah, if you can harvest them commercially, we're wondering how that's possible since they might take a long time to grow.
That's literally perfect timing, because look at the slide that I have up here. Okay, this is a bag of lichen that you can buy on a lot of these like flower shops or on Amazon online. Uh, and this is a picture that I took myself in the anthropology in Bethesda. And even though these are amazing, right? Like, yes, I want to have lichens all around me. Lichens should not be purchased because they may take a long time to grow, as Brianna is saying. How can they be harvested commercially? Well, once you remove a lichen from nature, it's gonna die. So lichens cannot be produced, you know, they cannot be planted, they can't just be grown. So everything that you see in a store that you buy is going to be natural, and therefore it has been removed from nature. So I find it very hard that it could be harvested sustainably, even though there are some companies that are arguing that, especially for these reindeer lichens, and these are mostly from Nordic countries. So they have been harvested, but I would highly encourage you not to purchase these. And every single person that you talk to in your programs or that you pass on the information to not buy lichens, because once you remove them, they're gonna die, all right? So let's enjoy them from afar or from pictures and by spreading knowledge. Mm-hmm. Oh, cool. We have more information about the reindeer novella. So the chapters, the stories keep coming. And one of the things that humans do use lichens is as bioindicators. And you might have heard about that. And some people say that, oh, if there's a lichen in a place, it's a healthy place. That's not quite the full story. So in this slide here, you see this image. It's a map from a school project, actually, that is based on lichen data. And they were noticing that some lichens were disappearing around cities, and then when the air quality improved, they were coming back. So there are lichens that are sensitive to air pollution, but there's also a lot of lichens that do just fine, that they're tolerant and actually even thrive in certain polluted environments. So there are certain species that are bioindicators, and that will depend on where you are. But there are a lot of governmental websites that have a lot of good information. So if you do get an interest, a spark for these, there's a lot of very good information out there. And lichens can absorb, or they can be used as bioindicators because they absorb everything that is in the air. And that's due to the fact that they don't have like a cuticle to separate. So that outer layer that you saw is very porous. So it's very like formed by these hyphal threads. But there is then the possibility of these pollutants penetrating, and a lot of them are going to be damaging, and you're going to see sometimes a lot of sick lichens, some lichens that you won't find anymore. So for example, fruticose lichens, so that we'll see later on, so sort of the branching one, and lichens and cyanolichens, so lichens that have cyanobacteria, they're going to be much harder to find in cities, for example. Yes, so we have Iwataki is a common edible rock trap lichen in Japan. Exactly, and that is the picture that we have, sort of the dark lichen with the pine nuts. That's exactly what it is, and it's supposed to be really tasty. Um, and you can also look up more about that. So let's go back to talking about their chemistry. They do have a crazy chemistry, and that's how you see so many different lichen colors. And some of these lichens, we've no idea why they have this so many compounds, but some of them we do know. So you see that a lot of lichens are this bright yellow or orange, is they're occurring in high sun exposure habitats, and it's thought that some of these compounds that these lichens have, it's going to act like a sunscreen and therefore prevent the photobiont from burning out, because that would lead them, if the photobiont dies, then they cannot produce sugars anymore, and therefore the microbiome cannot survive anymore and they would die. So there are a few more ideas why their lichens, their components. And one of them here, you see this wolf lichen again, that is thought to be poisonous to wolves and foxes. But let me tell you the story, is that cattle ranchers would use this lichen ground with glass and sort of leave them out so the foxes and wolves would eat them and not attack their cattle. But I would say that that's probably not the lichen and the glass that is present in this mixture. So I think they just have a bad rap in this case, because lichens are pretty safe. So I would encourage you, if you have other people in the house, even kids, lichens are completely safe for you to be out there and touch them. They're not dangerous as a lot of the other mushrooms. Of course, I would never encourage you to eat them. So never eat anything that you're not sure, but it's very safe to touch a lichen, and that can be very enriching experience to touch and feel how many different textures they have. And the way I see, so there are even more than 1,000 different compounds. So it's 1,000 new possibilities to cure, you know, diseases and for applications in agriculture. So there's a lot of cool research topics that can utilize lichen components. And some of these lichen components may fluoresce under the UV light. So let me just make sure that everybody's paying attention to these, because the next slide is the very best one. And if you need to leave, you can leave, but you have to see this slide before, okay? So this is a tree that has a lot of white lichens, all right? But when you shine a UV light, this is what happens. Boom, you see so many different colors of lichens. And here they might even see like, oh, these all look the same, right? There's all this white stuff, but then you can at least see that there are 4 different lichens here that have completely different chemistry. And I think that's pretty amazing. So why do I bother? Why should you bother? Why should the world bother about lichens? I think it's just a matter, you know, of we're humans, we're curious. We want to know how diverse the world is, and we want to create this base knowledge that can inform policymakers towards conservation. And now we're going through a biodiversity crisis and mass extinctions. How important it is for us to go out there and see what are the species and try to understand evolution and diversity worldwide. So I think just the fact of understanding the planet that we live, it's very important. And only by this base knowledge, we can really have applied and advanced research. Right now, we're going through a pandemic. How much they were able to use of this base research to infer what's known, you know. So now we have COVID, but there were other viruses before that provide a lot of previous knowledge that may be very useful. So there's a lot of research, for example, utilizing different lichen compounds for cancer. And that could mean that maybe one day we'll be able to cure this. So how to start, now that we're towards the end, just, you know, be out there, and let me tell you, hand lenses are going to be your new best friend, all right? So when you see a log, a piece of um a branch, when look up close and try to see differences between these lichens. Oh, these have different colors and different structures. There are three main types of lichens, and the next is our last activity, all right? So the main types of lichens is crustals, when they're very crusty and attached to their substrate. They're folios, when they are sort of, excuse me, following this, like they have this pattern around and is very leafy. To remove these, you sort of need a butter knife to go around. And then there's also this fruticose, sort of erect, branching, shrubby lichen, all right? So here are the keys to this. And now I ask you, what type of lichens do you think these are? Number 1, 2, 3, and 4. So do you think each one of these is folios, crustals, fruticals? You probably have done some activities virtually, all right? So try to say 1 is A, B, or C, 2 is A, B, and C. Meanwhile, I can, while you think about, okay, let me go back here. Maybe you can go back to, okay, branching fruticose, leafy folios, crusty crustals. Meanwhile, I'm going to read some of these questions. So Serenella asked, whoops, I just jumped all the way to the beginning. Is it the photobiont in the relationship what makes lichen fluoresce? No, it's actually the fungi. So the fungi are the ones usually producing the chemicals. However, there is this really amazing culturing experiments that sometimes the fungi, when it's being cultured, will be able to produce the acid on its own, but sometimes it won't. So the photobiont sometimes have to be present for the lichens to be able to produce these substances, but mostly is the microbiome, so the fungal component. All right. Okay, so 1 fruticose. Very good. Yes. So yes, number 1 fruticose, 2 and 3 are crustose, and number 4 is folios. Very well. All right. And of course, lichens, everything can happen. There's a lot of more different types because, you know, there's always the exceptions. There are lichens that could be gelatinous, and I see someone there knew already about gelatinous lichens, and these have no stock cyanobacteria as photobiont. So when they get wet, they get really jelly-like. Filamentous, here you can see sort of these threads. Squamulose, that is sort of fish scale, and then dimorphic. And dimorphic because it has a horizontal thallus, and here in this case has these scales, but sometimes it's crustals. And so it's horizontal, and then there's a vertical component right here that is vertical. So that's called dimorphic, 2 forms. Excuse me. All right, but now that you're gonna tell your friends that you know everything about lichens and they're gonna start sending you pictures, please identify this. Tell them that the underside is also important. So many people send me pictures of lichens, of mushrooms, and they don't even include the underside. I mean, how am I supposed to do my job? All right, so imagine this. Look at this lichen, for example. From the top is this light green, but underneath is brown with white dots. You couldn't have seen that from the top. And the same thing here at the bottom. The top of this lichen is actually the brown part, and the underneath is white and has these veins, all right? So same thing with mushrooms when you need to assess whether it has gills and pores and teeth, you also need to see lichens underneath, and of course a lot of other special characters. So if you do again have hand lenses and you go really in deep, you'll be able to see how some of these structures show what are their appearances. So we need you, naturalists and people interested in lichens, because there are a lot of lichens out there, but not a lot of lichenologists. So we need to captivate, and that is something that here is a little bit different, because I think I started mentioning this during my talk, is that we're not very attached to lichens culturally. So we don't grow up thinking about lichens. We don't eat lichens. So we don't even know what are lichens until we have the opportunity to talk to someone or being out there and someone will point it to you. So I would like to encourage everybody to include lichens in programs. And these are some of the tours that we created when in Costa Rica. So we created a lichen tour and a night lichen tour, okay, that we were able to see these lichens beautiful glowing in the dark. And there's a lot of resources available, and I'm going to send this list to Serenella when she sends you the presentation, or actually it will be in the presentation. So if you're interested in lichens and want to learn more about them, there are a lot of great resources out there. All right, so I hope my take-home message, if you do learn or if you did learn something, is just to open your eyes to see what is usually overlooked. All right, yes, lichens are pretty cool, and I hope you agree with me on that one. So with that, many thanks to everybody for being here, to Serenella again for the presentation, for the opportunity to talk to you all, the Audubon Naturalist Society, and also my colleagues here at BRIT and all of my previous collaborators. With that, I do have my email here. I believe that Serenella will also send. If you have any further questions, you can always email me. And I have a last challenge here, and this is a really tough one, and I do hope that you can find where is the spider on this one. Thank you all for the feedback. I appreciate. I hope you all had a good time and learned something new about lichens. Yes, Serenella said maybe a future program, a night lichen walk. That would be pretty wonderful. Oh,
Manuela, this is the worst "Where's Waldo" thing I have ever seen.
I know, right? And it's so funny that you say that, because I used to exactly have it included in my slide, where is Waldo? So I just changed today or yesterday to the find the spider, to give you a little hint, where is it? And to be fair, I actually, when I took this picture in the field, I couldn't see it, especially because it was on my iPhone. So I kept taking the picture and missing it. So I have a picture of the tree and then a picture marked where is the spider. Okay, so it's I'm gonna reveal center right. Yes. So the spider is right here. Do you see?
Oh my God.
The cephalothorax and the legs, and here's the abdomen. So some people might have gotten from the abdomen, some from the legs, but it's a pretty tough one, so I had to leave it at the end. I want to say special hello to my colleagues at Patuxent. Hi, Abby, good to see you. I miss everybody at Patuxent as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Manuela. This was so wonderful. I loved it. So with that, I would like Bradley to read the last few questions. And
Mm-hmm.
after Bradley reads them, if you would like to unmute yourself to ask a question, this is your time.
All right. So yeah, we definitely have a good amount of questions. And I'll just start from the first one that hasn't been answered yet. How fast do lichens grow, and does that speed of growth depend on the environment or structure or their symbiotic partners?
Absolutely, great question. And it's I don't know if you also heard about this, but when I started learning about lichens, the idea was that lichens are sort of like super slow growers, but there are actually some fast growers as well. So it's very hard to know because um, the study used to be like lichenometry, and it's I mentioned briefly that it can be more easily done, for example, when you have specific landmarks or specific dates. Uh, but it's usually very hard. Lichens could be very old. I think there's like some that are estimated to be thousands of years old, while some are much younger. And it definitely varies a lot. But to be very honest, it's very hard to say this lichen is X amount of years old. So um, it's just something that it's not known, also because it takes a long time. If a lichen is 30 years old, you needed to have a point in time that say, you know, this lichen, I saw it this tiny and now it's 30 years old. So there's a lot of time that has elapsed since then for personnel as well. So for someone to be able to check these. So I think when having parcels and monitoring would be easier, but it's very hard to respond to such question very precisely. So I'm sorry if I didn't even respond, but it's difficult. But lichens can have, you know, the estimated lifespan or maybe idea is that it could be from like 30-35 years, the life cycle perhaps of a lichen.
Huh? That's really interesting. And then this next question's going back to the how they react to UV light, and we're wondering why do different colors appear when that light is shined on them?
Because they're different lichen components, so they all react differently to the UV light. So some of these 1,000, there are over 1,000 now different compounds. Not all of them glow, but some of them do, and they will have different fluorescence response.
Okay. And this we have another one about reproduction. I know we didn't get to touch on it a lot, but
Mm-hmm.
do lichens always reproduce as a symbiosis, or do component species sometimes find each other?
Yes. Oh, yeah. I did. Was about to get that. There is. I don't know if this is the one about how the photobiont and then they find each other. So primarily lichens have two modes of reproduction, where we call sexual and asexual. Sexual is in the case where, similar to other mushrooms, for example, that is a spore. So the spore will germinate as a fungi and then has to find a partner, a photobiont. And this is actually something that I'm working on specifically with cyanolichens. And lichens are broadly known now to share the photobiont in a system very similar to domestication. So they find an ideal, what it will be a crop, and then they share extensively throughout many different lichens. So that will be in the case that they have to recognize a compatible partner from another lichen, and then they will either steal or share such partner. And that's the case where there is resymbiosis, because you started as a spore and then you find a photobiont and then you create a lichen. And in the asexual type, broadly speaking, it's usually these combo packages, and there are many different types. And this is one of the most important characters for lichen identification, because there are different ways that these structures can look like. Sometimes they're just like powdery things. Sometimes they're like tiny little fingers that break off. Sometimes it's just a piece of the lichen as a fragment, and they're going to have both of these components together, the fungi and the algae or cyanobacteria together. And very little research, but still most likely that the microbiome might already be present in such instances as well. So what was is that the response to the question, or did I leave something out?
That's a good response. We actually had another question that came in as you were answering, asking about if algae are picky about which fungus they partner with.
Wonderful question. So actually, the algae are not so picky. The fungi are the pickier ones. So the fungi usually are more selective in the choice of photobionts than the algae. So in general terms, the fungi, they're a lot more loyal. So a lot of the times or most of the times, they're just going to partner with one group or one genus of green algae. And sometimes there are some fungi that are able to partner with both a green algae and cyanobacteria, sometimes at the same times, sometimes separately, depending on the environment, going back to the other question. But the algae, on the other hand, they are being spread around throughout lichens and possibly, and definitely other organisms. So there are other plants, sometimes that are symbiotic with cyanobacteria. And in research has been shown that sometimes the same cyanobacteria can be in symbiosis with a plant or different types of plants, and also in lichens. So the fungi are the loyal ones, and the algae, they go around a little bit more.
So we do have a couple more questions if we do have time for them. I know it's 8:10 already.
I'm okay, but if somebody has to leave, I won't feel offended. I won't take it. I'm very chatty. I warned Seronella about this.
Well, then I'll just keep going then. The next one is really because of the similar, I guess, texture and look of sea kelp and gelatinous lichen. Is there a good way of explaining the difference of them scientifically? It's because of their similar look?
Well, primarily they will be growing in different habitats. And I think scientifically the way they're different, because I think the gelatinous seaweed, it's part of their composition to be, this individual organism of these algae. It's the chemical components, is their metabolism that gives such appearance. While in a lichen, it is also due to the appearance, but it's the appearance of the cyanobacteria. So if you've seen free living nostoc before, they just look like a blob of jelly. So I don't know what is their metabolism in comparison to an algae that is gelatinous. But in the lichen will, even though it might look like a foliose lichen, it will have this gelatinous because of the nostoc that is part of this association. So. But I wouldn't see a way to get them confused, because they would be living in different habitats.
Right. All right. And then two more. So this one's someone heard that lichen that is eaten by reindeer and that is eaten by people in Finland absorbed radiation from Chernobyl. Have you heard of this or have any insights on it?
I have heard about it. I don't know how we're doing on research about that, but let me just, it is eaten by reindeer that is eaten by people in Finland. In Finland, yeah. Actually the plate that the reindeer lichen that I ate was in Finland. So I hope this is not going on, but I did hear about that because of the several wildlife that has been consuming vegetation. So I don't have a lot of more insights aside from, yes, I heard, and it is possible that because the lichens have absorbed that the reindeer would be too. And that I'm sure will be very problematic in Finland, especially because they eat meat there. So it's their sort of like relative of cattle. I remember being there and having this um, not ranches, but they even had entirely protected areas, like do not step, because it was completely covered in reindeer lichen. And over there, everybody knew what a lichen was. So I don't know much about the radiation about it, but I just have heard loosely that it is occurring. So, but lichens in Finland are part of their culture, and people on the streets knew what lichens were. So since kids, they learn about that because it is an important food source for reindeer, which is very important for them. So I think it's culturally something that somehow we could uh, strive to change here in the US too.
Very interesting. So the next one is just any place to see the UV fluorescing lichens in the, I guess, in the DMV specifically. You know?
Well, Serenella just told me that she might have seen some in Rock Creek Park. I have never seen them myself in the DMV area, but they do have certain species that are UV positive in the DMV area. And I think some of these are cladonia, so mostly like dimorphic or fruticose, but there may also be some crostals lichens and perhaps some folios too. So it's potentially, I remember meeting someone that was having like a list. There's like a checklist of lichens from Virginia too. So someone could maybe check that there are some groups that are more prone to have UV, that are more prone to be UV plus. So these are Cladoniaceae, Phyceaceae, and literature can indicate or at least guide you through. So I think there are some species, but maybe we'll have to go in many walks before we find some.
So during these wonderful conversations, we've had a couple other questions come in. I don't know if you can still see the chat, but Mary Beth put in an interesting comment regarding our discussion of the sea kelp versus lichen. So if you want to read that and maybe give
Cool.
They're intertidal seaweeds. They're not kelp. But
oh, okay. Thank you for the clarification.
Oh yeah, the person actually asked me about kelp and not seaweed. I apologize. But yeah, I think I don't know much about this, and I'll definitely look it up. There, if you sign my last slide with my presentation, it had a quote, "We're all lichens." It's we've never been individuals. A quote by Gilbert in his paper about symbiosis, and I think it's we're increasing our knowledge that there's so many relationships that we have no idea what's going on there or what's the level of symbiosis. So I really do think that the symbiotic world has a lot of unknowns. So the more people know about it, the more we all have to gain about that. So very cool question that I haven't been asked before. So
the last two I'm going to lump into one since they're kind of about you, and it's really just how did you become interested in lichen, and if you were in DC, where would you go to look at lichen?
Well, in DC, I've been to many areas giving programs, and Great Falls is good, but I would say that the closest one is just Ted Roosevelt Island. I was preparing a bio blitz there, and I was able, if you've been there, in the very middle where there's like the monuments, there are certain trees there, and they have great lichen diversity. They have crustose lichens that I haven't seen in other places. And they also had a fruticose lichen, which is pretty hard to see in the city. So In the places that I've been, I just, if I want to be able, if I want to, like, I know that this place has all fruticos, folios, and crystals and dimorphic lichens. That's the way I go, because it was also pretty close to where I used to live in Arlington. So, and how did I get into lichens? It's a, actually, I just celebrated my, let's see, my 18th birthday with lichens this month. So I just had a workshop at night, like you guys are having, and I fell in love with lichens, and that was 2002. I had just started undergrad, and I immediately fall in love. So I'm like, this is the coolest thing I've never heard of, and I've always liked mushrooms in high school too, so I decided to go into biology. And I always thought that less known organisms deserve our attention. So of course I love mega charismatic megafauna, right? Like the fox is beautiful, but I also think that we should pay attention to other things in life in general, and lichens is just such a very good representation of that. So I immediately fell in love with lichens. So I've been studying lichens since 2002, in September 2002. So that's why I say it's my anniversary. And then from then, I'm originally from Brazil. And then I just kept studying lichens, did my master's, PhD, postdoc. And now I can actually have a job as a lichenologist. So
Well,
the dedication pay off.
that's really inspiring. Hopefully, maybe one of our natural sours will.
I hope so. Yeah. One, if I can reach one person at a time to introduce what are lichens and or change one person's mind about, I hope that you can all now pass on to this information. And this way we can also spread more lichen love around.
That's wonderful. That is all of our questions now.
Wonderful.
Yes. I don't know if anyone else wanted to chime in and ask a question, but that's all the ones in the chat.
Can take out my.
Awesome. Thank you so much, everybody. This has been wonderful. Thank you, Manuela. And please, I invite the audience to join me in thanking you for such a wonderful and special presentation.
Wonderful. Thank you.